Because once
Mm.
you have the prototype, it then takes 10 years to expand the industrial footprint to mass produce it, and then another several years for mass application. So you're realistically, the best case scenario for green tech, you're talking the late 2030s. I don't want to say no, but it's very unlikely because you're talking about something that would be a mass manufacturing build out. One of the reasons that
Right.
the mRNA vaccines happen so fast is they had already been past the prototype stage. They were already used
Right.
fairly extensively through agriculture. So, the jump from cattle to humans is not an insignificant one, but it's not like they were starting from scratch. And as we saw, they have been able to code the vaccine in less than 6 weeks. So this is a technology that was already reasonably mature. When you're talking about green tech, we're not to the prototype stage yet. Iron's in the fire, and this is where the smart money is going. I don't mean to suggest we won't have a breakthrough, but even if we do have the breakthrough today, you're still talking 10 years before mass application. Energy and food exporter. So for a world that is going to be energy shy and food shy, Latin America writ large should do reasonably well. But it's important to separate Mexico from the rest of Latin America. It's got a healthier demography writ large. It's got a better industrial plant, has a more educated workforce. It's part of the NAFTA system. It really doesn't kind of match economically or, dare I say, even culturally with the rest of Latin America. Moving into South America, the Brazilians are going to be facing some issues. They're okay for energy, they're okay for food, but they've got a very difficult geography. Basically, think of Brazil like a table that's lost two legs, but the
Mm.
high side is on the coast. So anything that wants to flow, it has to go up, 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 and then straight down. And that limits their ability to participate unless they can have a lot of capital come in to help with infrastructure. That happened in the last 15 years. That's not going to happen moving forward. So a lot of the value add we've seen in industry in Brazil is very questionable. I mean, we're not talking like a Chinese style collapse here, but the golden age is probably over. But on the flip side, things are just getting going in Argentina. Now, I know, Argentina. Everybody's like, the place is a basket.
Default out of the financial
Oh my God,
system.
yes. And everything that you think about Argentina is true. However, it's got the best land in the world outside of the Midwest. It even has a good river system to help with local transport, and it has zero security concerns. So in a world where rule of law breaks down, where long-range transport's more difficult, where finance is restricted, for the Argentines, this is just a typical Tuesday.
Mm.
So it's not so much that they're rising to the median, it's the median's falling to them. And in finance, it's all about the delta. So this gets really interesting really fast. Not recommending you buy property in Argentina because it's still Argentina. But Argentina is likely to be one of the big winners from this transition as the global system breaks down.
As
Absolutely. I just underlined that it's a little different for every region and it's a lot
right.
different for every sector. Anything that is a gangly supply line that requires dozens of participants in multiple continents, that's just going to stop. And so if that's an industry you care about, you need to look at how countries are resourcing product production to their own localities. We're probably going to have a series of regional trading systems with very little interconnection between them. You'll probably have a French-centric one in Western Europe. You'll probably have a Turkey-centric one in the Middle East and Southeast Europe. You'll probably have the Japanese reaching out to a whole lot of folks, but because of their demographics, they're going to do it with trade and money instead of warships. This is a good thing. And then, of course, the Western Hemisphere is kind of its own thing. There are definitely, let's call it a relative winner. A couple things to keep in mind about Japan. Number one, they've got the world's second most powerful Navy. So they have a capacity to reach out in a way that very few countries can, really only a half a dozen. Second, you're absolutely right. This is the first country to go through that demographic transition. For them, it started in the 80s, and it's well past the point of no return. But it's gone at such a slow rate, and the Japanese have been able to adapt their policies to it. One of the reasons that we all think of Japan as an automated robotic place is because this is a conscious choice. As they deal with fewer and fewer workers and consumers, they've had to automate. Now, they've done this under the aegis of the American-led globalized system. And that has allowed them to do things over 30 years that other countries are going to have to do over like 5. And
Mm.
they realize that they can no longer be a power unto themselves. So two things come from that. Number one, they have a program that's basically build where you sell, and they use foreign investment to go into countries with healthier demographics and construct their products there. Is that they've realized that they can't do this by themselves. And so they've made the conscious strategic choice for permanent long-term alignment with the United States. And they did that successfully when Trump was president. They are the
Mm.
only country in the world that has been able to get along well with both Trump and with Biden. They basically bought their way in, and it's working for them. On our road from Bill Clinton to W. Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, we've become more and more economically nationalist. And if that were to change, it would matter. But I don't think the American population at the moment is interested in engaging in with the rest of the world economically. I just don't think that's even in the cards. And I think Apple's decision to start pulling out of China is kind of the quintessential example, because they were always the furthest, the most extreme when it comes to doubling down on the East Asian system. Ooh, that's a good one. I think we're seeing some of that. Part of that is environmental and social governance shifts, which do give the workers a bigger say and do give consumers a bigger say. But the core issue is going to be demographic. We are in the middle of a worker bust between the boomers retiring, large generation, and the Zoomers entering the workforce, small generation. We're currently at a gap of about 400,000 shortage workers, or a shortage of 400,000 workers per year. You would think that would give a lot more negotiating power to workers. The only reason I don't want to underline that, I'm not quite sure, is because we are coming out of COVID and everything
Mm.
has yet to settle. But the
Mm.
mechanics certainly suggest that that is going to be the trend for the next few years. The world is going to look very different, and there's a lot of things in the wider world to be very concerned about. I am concerned about a number of countries simply decivilizing when they lose access to the inputs of a modern world. That means a breakdown and a regression. That's unavoidable. I'm specifically really concerned about the agricultural question, because the carrying capacity of everyone's lands without agriculture, I'm sorry, without fertilizer, you're talking about it dropping by half. So we're going to lose hundreds of millions of people, maybe even a billion in the better case scenarios. But based on where you are, that might not apply. And in the case of the United States, you've got a stable consumption system, a reasonably robust labor system, no security threats, energy self-sufficient, food self-sufficient, and an educational system that hasn't worked great for the last 20 years, but is actually really well geared to training up the next round of manufacturing workers. So all the elements that you need for revitalized America are already here. All you need is a shock elsewhere to underline the fact that things need to move. COVID did that. Trump did
Mm.
that. Biden's doing that. The Ukraine war is doing that. COVID in China is doing that. Everything is moving in the direction it needs to in the United States. We will emerge from this in a much better position, just that the road from here to there is not a straight line. You've got over a billion people that simply cannot be fed with the land's quality and with the inputs that are going to be available. It is by far the country that is going to suffer the most. Other countries that are dependent upon international interactions for trade and for capital, I'd say Korea and Germany are at the top of that list for slightly different reasons. I don't see how the Germans make this work. Their supply chains are dependent on a half a dozen countries, and as long as the Germans are turning a blind eye to Ukraine, those half a dozen countries are really mad. But if the Germans start acting like everyone says that they want to, and they want the Germans to rearm and put troops in Poland to fight the Russians, we've seen this movie before. I don't see a good path out of this for Germany that is positive. For the Koreans, by the numbers, everything's worse. But if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's never underestimate the Koreans. They can make hay out of anything.